In our last lecture, we covered the learning objectives that are shown here from Concept 36.2. We looked at the apoplast and symplast compartments. We talked about various kinds of short distance transport, including passive transport and active transport. We talked about the way plants use hydrogen ions, and they pump hydrogen ions um, to to help with their short distance transport in various ways. And then we looked at the concept of water potential. So today we want to move on to looking at the long distance movement of waters, and specifically how water moves from the roots to the leaves. And this would be in the xylem. So just as a reminder, look at this figure from the beginning of chapter 2, which shows resource acquisition and transport in plants. And remember that plants acquire water and minerals from the roots, and these water and minerals travel through the xylem up to the leaves of the plant. Even if it's a very tall tree, the water can move all the way from the roots up through the trunk into the leaves of a tall plant. So our objectives are, I want you to be able to explain or diagram how water and minerals move all the way from the soil through root tissues into the xylem, and then how the cohesion and tension model explains the movement of xylem sap all the way from the roots to the leaves. So let's look at the roots first. So most absorption of water and minerals occurs near root tips. So this is a diagram of a longitudinal section of a root. And you can see down here near the tip of the root is where the cells are dividing and producing new cells that push this root cap, which is made out of dead cells, push this root cap deeper into the soil and also produce more cells that will later differentiate and become the different kinds of tissues in the plant, the vascular tissue in the middle, and the cortex tissue, the storage tissue, and the epidermis tissue. So this is where the root is dividing. And a little bit up from that, these cells up here have divided, maybe a day or two, and they've elongated, and now they've differentiated and specialized into the different kinds of tissues. And most of the absorption of water happens in this zone of differentiation of the root tip. And so what anatomical features do you see in this diagram that enhance the absorption of water and minerals? Hopefully you see that this is where the root hairs are, and you'll remember from a few days ago how we talked about the root hairs greatly expand the surface area of the root and enhance the absorption of water and minerals. So the soil includes water, and sometimes it's not very much water. Sometimes the soil is very dry, but typically soil includes water and a kind of a combination of water and minerals that we call the soil solution. And this solution can move into a root either by an apoplastic or symplastic route. So remember, think about these two words again, and what is the difference between the apoplastic and the symplastic roots? Pause your video for a second and just answer those questions. What do we mean by apoplastic and symplastic? Now, hopefully you remember that the apoplastic route consists of all of the material outside of the plasma membrane. So this would be water that's traveling through the cell walls, in between cells, but not actually crossing into the cytoplasm of the cells. So this pinkish line or reddish line shows the apoplastic route. And so water can travel through a root hair, or through the external spaces of a root hair and through the cortex of a root all the way until it gets to this endodermis and the Casparian strip, and we'll focus on that in a minute. Or water can cross into the symplast at any point along this line. Any place you see a pink line turning to a blue arrow, that is where water has crossed a plasma membrane and gone into the symplast. And water could be kind of a transmembrane route and go into the symplast and then go back out into the apoplast if it crosses through another plasma membrane. But once water gets into the symplast, it can travel through the plasmodesmata, these channels, and just go from cell to cell to cell all the way into the endodermis before it finally needs to cross through another plasma membrane to get into the xylem. So once the water gets into the symplast, it can keep going through the plasmodesmata from cell to cell to cell without crossing through cell walls and cell membranes again. But once water reaches the endodermis, these endodermis cells are surrounded, each of these cells is surrounded, kind of encircled by a kind of a waxy strip. And so, so this prevents water from passing between these two cells. It prevents water in the apoplast from crossing between these two cells. And in order for water to get into the xylem at the center of the root, this water actually has to go through a selectively permeable membrane here and go into the symplast. And then since the xylem cells are dead, this water has to cross another membrane to get into the xylem. Or the water that's already in the symplast can continue through the plasmodesmata of these endodermis cells and then finally have to cross through another cell membrane, plasma membrane, to get into the dead xylem cells. And I want to try to illustrate this for you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can see me. And I've got a couple of boxes here, and these boxes illustrate cells of the endodermis. And these cells kind of are arranged. If you think of a cell being vertical, these cells would be arranged kind of in a circle that would form kind of like a chimney, like a round chimney on the inside of the plant. And I've put these rubber bands around these cells to illustrate what the Casparian strip would be like in between these cells. So there's some couple of rubber bands that are showing here. And so if these rubber bands weren't here, the connection between these cells would not be very tight, and water could just seep in between the cells through the apoplast. But with these rubberized strips, or in a plant in the endodermis, they're actually waxy strip, and so the water cannot penetrate in between there because these rubber bands in my model here, or the Casparian strip, actually makes a waterproof layer that the cells can't get through, that the water can't get through. And then to illustrate this a little bit more, I'm going to show you a video that illustrates this. So I'll unplug my headset so that you'll be able to hear the sound, and I'll turn it on.